All right, everyone. Hello and welcome into today's discussion where we're going to be taking a look at the current state of the NFC North. And this is going to be a video that we're going to do a couple of times this year because I think it's good to check in on the state of the NFC North, see how the division's going throughout the offseason and the regular season. Now, the frequency of this topic, I don't know how often it's going to come up. We'll touch base like probably after free agency, the first wave or two. And then we'll definitely touch base after the draft, touch base again during training camp right before the season. And then maybe we'll go through every quarter of the season, every quarter section of the season and look for updates and how things are going. So because I think that this division is definitely very much up for grabs next year. We're not going to see consistency. You know, there's not going to be a hot hand. Just because something is doesn't mean it's going to continue to be. And that greatly applies to the NFL in this division specifically that we are in, the NFC North. So let's go through each team one by one. We'll do this quickly because there's not much to talk about until they start making changes, but we can at least sort of glean what kind of direction we can anticipate all of these teams going and where the Vikings are going to land next season, because despite being 13-4, all right, despite being 11-0 in one-score games, despite winning the division, going to the playoffs, closing out the division championship rather quickly in the season. You know, I think we wrapped it up with 3 or 4 games to go, if I remember correctly. That's hard to do again. That's really hard to do again, especially at the talent level that the Vikings have, mostly on the defensive side of the ball that we've addressed ad nauseum. So it's going to depend how the Vikings do in the offseason. Not a lot of cap space, not a lot of draft capital. 11-0 in one-score games is not sustainable. That is very unrepeatable. You will likely never see that happen again. So you could probably subtract 5 or 6 wins from that 11-0 total and get a more accurate assessment of where the Vikings could end up in 2023. It's still a possibility that they repeat as division champions, but they are the ultimate candidate to regress next year. Both because a 13-4 record is very hard to repeat. They had a lot of luck on their side. They had a lot of things go their way this year, and the defense is likely going to be a lot of new faces from the draft and some players that they signed to cheap team-friendly contracts on 1 or 2 year deals that they get in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th waves of free agency. So the Vikings have an uphill climb next year, and this is going to be a really big test of Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and his ability to evaluate talent, because last year they pulled off a 13-4 record with mostly Rick Spielman and Mike Zimmer's guys. Okay, because Kwesi's first draft was non-existent this year. Not a lot of contributors other than maybe Ed Ingram, who I think played every game this season, but everybody else not so much. They've got a lot of building to do, especially on the defensive side of the football. Moving on to the Green Bay Packers, I think that this can be summarized in one sentence. It depends on Aaron Rodgers. The roster is good. The roster's fine. It's capable. The coaching staff is good. I think they're not going to get Nathaniel Hackett back, are they? I don't know yet. But that's neither here nor there. That's just a weird thought that popped into my head. They've drafted well. You know, they had a good solid second half of the season last year, missed a playoff spot by 1 game. It just depends on Aaron Rodgers. Jordan Love, I don't think, is going to be the third coming of another 15-year span of them having a Hall of Fame quarterback. Lightning is not going to strike 3 times for them. So the quarterback position is what is going to determine what happens with the Green Bay Packers. But the roster is good enough, and the NFC North is weird enough for them to never be out of the conversation, especially if Aaron Rodgers comes back. I think that they would be the favorites to win the division next year. Moving on to the Lions, I think the troops have bought into the Dan Campbell persona. They've bought into his mentality, his game planning. They've rallied around his personality in terms of how they perform on the field. I think that the early idea that this was just going to crumble because he's not a serious head football coach it can be dismissed almost. Now, he's got some things to do to clean up his end of the game, like time management and just, you know, situational awareness. I get that, but the roster is responding, and the roster is actually not bad. I think, my opinion, hot take, they should stick with Jared Goff and try to build around him because they've been drafting well. They're getting really good performances out of players like Jamal Williams. He was a fantasy stud for me this year, believe it or not. And, you know, Amon-Ra St. Brown has been a huge hit for them. So if they continue to draft well, I think that they should spend their first round pick on a corner this year, somebody on defense to help that defense get better. I think that this team is quickly going to ascend and compete for the NFC North Championship for the first time in a very, very long time. And they could very well dethrone the Vikings and push them down to the third spot when the dust settles. And last but not least, your last place team, the very dead last team, the Chicago Bears, with the first overall pick in the NFL draft this year. Reality. They're going to get better. We have to live in a world of reality. It's just the same way that we argue that winning a Super Bowl in back-to-back years, winning a division title in back-to-back years, all those things are extraordinarily difficult to do. It is really hard to be piss poor, dead place last every single year. It's really hard to do that back-to-back unless you're the Cleveland Browns sometimes. That's not a shot at them. That's just reality. But the Chicago Bears are definitely going to be a better football team this year. They've got a really good, healthy amount of assets to use to make this team better. Lots of salary cap space, draft picks galore. They're going to get better in terms of personnel on the field. It's just going to depend on how far does the coaching take them. Is this a serious coaching staff? I don't know. That remains to be seen. But the Bears will be better. So they will be more competitive, and they will bring problems for the Minnesota Vikings. And we have to be honest with ourselves. The Bears have never been an easy W for the Minnesota Vikings ever. You know, just going to Chicago is always a toss-up for us because it's just a difficult place to play. So to recap, Vikings, kind of in no man's land right now. But I think a 13-4 season is unrepeatable. Biggest candidate to regress out of maybe the entirety of the NFL. Packers, depends on Aaron Rodgers. Lions, they're ascending. They could definitely be a big challenge next year, and the Bears are just going to get better by default next season because there's nowhere to go but up for them. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below of my assessment. What's your assessment on the state of the NFC North as it is today? We will revisit this topic later on in the season, or the offseason, I should say. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.